Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Will Mainor. I'm a senior consultant and MEP solution specialist at Microdesk. I've been here for about 12 years, and today we're going to talk about BIMrx. If you look in the dialog box for the GoToWebinar, there's an opportunity to enter questions. Please type them in. I'll review them before the end of the webinar, and hopefully we can get to everything. All right. So BIMrx is Microdesk's growing suite of Revit tools, whose earliest feature round trips information from a BIM model to Excel and back again. These tools can be used to quickly put information into the hands of non-Revit users and put to use Excel's powerful formulas and conditional tools to help designers edit their models. For example, we can perform quality assurance checks, find and replace data, convert parameters to uppercase, import information from third-party sources, matching it to our tags, perform calculations, or takeoffs. Imagine an engineer not fluent in Revit who needs to calculate pipe volumes. Imagine an asset manager who wants to import barcodes they received from the field. Imagine an architect who needs to update values in the door schedule based on new requirements they received from an owner. With all of these examples, BIMrx can help. I have Revit open and BIMrx featured up on my ribbon bar. There's some additional tools that are available on Microdesk's site within the Autodesk App Store. Those are branded under the Accelerator, and those are currently available for free. But today we're going to focus on the 4 powerful tools under the BIMrx tab, these that are highlighted on the left. And if I'm imagining round-tripping information to and from Excel, the first and easy example of something that I might want to do is correct a common issue with Revit models, and that is duplicate mark values. When we've got multiple users working together in a project, drafting the same type of element, oftentimes Revit will inadvertently assign 2 equal mark values to 2 different elements, which we know generates warnings that we prefer to clean out for housekeeping. So we can use the BIMrx tool to export information about our elements to Excel, use Excel's ability to auto-increment numbers, and then round-trip the mark values back in so that we know there are no duplicate values. Before we get to that, though, along the way, we're going to see BIMrx's selection tool. BIMrx gives us the ability to access view filters to apply to a selection set. So if, for example, I wanted to select all doors in the model, I could do that. And in this case, I've got 286 doors selected now, without the traditional out-of-the-box method of drawing a large selection window around everything I see, waiting for a second as Revit organizes its thoughts, and then clicking on the filter button up on the ribbon bar, deselecting everything and choosing doors. Instead, now I could come through, set up view filters inside of my project template for all of the common things that I want to select. Alternately, we can select objects as a function of parameters. So for example, if we were managing discrete work sets and we were concerned that objects were getting put on an incorrect work set, we could use this to troubleshoot the model. So for example, if I wanted to see everything on the level 9 work set, I could select it all, use Revit's out-of-the-box hide command. HI is the keyboard shortcut I use. And then in this case, if I orbit around, I see there are, in fact, walls on the 8th floor that accidentally got put onto the wrong work set. So we can use the BIMrx tool to quickly find issues like that. HR is the keyboard shortcut to restore the temporary hide settings. And now I can go through and select. Say in this example, we know there's issues with mark values related to light fixtures. So I can select all of the light fixtures in the project. I can click on the extract button. I'm going to extract the selected objects, 1 tab per category. I'll explain this a little bit more later on, and click on the export button. Now I've obviously done this before, so I've got spreadsheets that I can just save over. In this case, I want to export all of the lights for the project. And this project's pretty big. We might have quite a few lights. So I'd expect this to take a few seconds, maybe 10 to 15 seconds. And what BIMrx is doing is essentially a raw data dump. It's collecting all the elements I've selected and all of their parameters. And it's finding common parameters between the elements. It's aligning them in columns. It's identifying parameters which may be unique for one element, and it's color coding those. I'll show that to you in just a second. Once we're finished, the tool reports to me how many elements have been exported. And then I can navigate to the location where I saved that light fixture export and open up the Excel file. Okay. The light fixture is exported with 3 tabs. The very first tab gives me an export summary. And here we list all of the families by their type and gives us a quantity of instances. Now, as a sidebar, BIMrx was originally envisioned as a tool to help quality assurance checks for large databases of asset information inside of BIM models, namely to help out owners and operators, institutions, as they're migrating asset data into their work order management software. And in those cases where we're linking one database to another, it's extremely important that the information is correct and that everything is formatted and consistent before it's exported. So we found the best place to QA/QC our models was through an Excel spreadsheet. And we think these tabs still provide value to project engineers or designers who want to QA/QC their design. So for example, a PM may look at this high-level overview of all of the families in the project and say to themselves, I didn't realize we had 31 4x6 light fixtures in the project. I thought those got superseded. What's going on? Let's double check. The meat of the export happens on the lighting fixture tab. Here, BIMrx lists all of the elements in the selection set, includes their element ID, as well as all of the parameters that it finds. The color theming here is important for quality assurance. The light blue columns indicate that I've got a type parameter. White columns indicate the values of an instance parameter. And importantly, yellow columns indicate parameters which exist on other families of the same category, but not on the current family. So this would be an important QA/QC check if I'm creating schedules inside of my BIM model, and I'm concerned that all of the light fixtures have the correct parameters associated to them. Now, the raw data dump is important for QA/QC, but for an end user, it may be important to have tools for quickly sorting through all of the columns. You see, we've got one column per parameter. And BIMrx provides an Excel file with macros that allow me, for example, to show and hide columns. Okay. I might get a warning message. And this is based on the fact that because the file comes with macros, Windows is going to use a security feature to initially lock it. I have to click Enable Content to say that I agree to operating those macros. Now I can go up to Excel's Quick Access toolbar, and BIMrx provides me a macro listing all of the columns, namely all of the parameters that came from every light fixture. So I could start by hiding everything. I may want to include the element ID. In this specific example, we were fixing an issue with duplicate mark values, so I'm going to include that as well. I'll hit the Apply button. And now we've got a list of all of the mark values. Normally under Excel, I might expect to be able to drag and drop a cell and have it auto increment. That's the default functionality, which in the development of BIMrx, we thought was often less appropriate for modifying parameters. Very often we might be dragging and dropping, say it's an equipment tag or it's a lighting fixture ID. We want the next light fixture, if we're dragging LF10, we want the next light fixture to also be LF10. So BIMrx shut off that functionality initially. What that means is if I want to auto increment, I just hold my control key down as I drag. And I'm going to drag the mark values all the way down to the bottom. And here now we've got a unique value. And maybe I've got some concern that 3, could that exist already in the project under some other element ID? Maybe I don't want to take a chance. So what I'm going to do is put a 9.9 at the very beginning of it. Stretch my column out just a little bit. Again, control, we'll drag everything down. We're almost done. I'm going to save the file, and I'm not required to close the Excel file. Back inside of Revit, I'm going to click on the Update button. I'm going to search by date modified. And the file we just saved was main lights, right? Let me go back into my file, and I'm going to hit the save button one more time, just to make sure we did it. And there we go. That's a better timestamp. I'm going to click the open button. And importing the data is going to come much quicker than exporting it. There's no sorting or intelligent decision-making that needs to happen behind the scenes. But now in this case, I don't get any warning for duplicate mark values. And if I selected just one of the light fixtures in here, I can see that now its mark is one that begins with a 9.9 at the very beginning. So that's pretty straightforward, and I think that makes a lot of sense. We could also go back through inside of Excel, and we could review parameters and do things like find and replace. Let me go back up to the top real quick. And if I use the show hide columns macro again, maybe in this case, we might want to add, who knows, there could be something in the comments that we might want to edit. So if I added that and chose apply, then maybe we could come in and we could put text in, you know, this is a fluorescent light. Oops. You know, paste that in. Alternately, if we had a parameter that had been entered, actually, we'll touch on this with doors. I'm not going to get ahead of myself. If I were to save this, and this goes very quickly, so I'm going to back inside of Revit, go to the Microdesk tab, and re-update based on the spreadsheet I just saved. And in this case, I'm not required to have the light fixtures selected. There you can see that light fixture has been updated with the comment floor. So everything worked as expected. But now I'm thinking to myself, we might want to do a more complicated example, because importing back and forth to Excel seems pretty straightforward. But I really wanted to show you a couple use cases that you might not have thought of. So let's try this out. Imagine you've been working on a model and you got a change. You've got some instruction from the owner that we need to change the design. Namely, they've given you a list of assets in the model. In this case, we could be talking about doors. And they come back to us and they say, we want to add a card reader to every door in this list. Or maybe the information could have come from the project architect. But in any case, all they gave me was an email or a spreadsheet, and this isn't tied to the model in any way, except that we know the door numbers exist inside of the model. What we could do in that case is come back into our project, select all of our doors, extract a door schedule. And once again, I'm overwriting a file that I exported previously. We'll wait a few seconds. Open up the door schedule that we created. Okay. And let me expand this. I'm going to go to the Doors tab, and here's all of the information. So we have the element IDs, and our unique door identifiers are going to be stored under the mark. So let me go back. I'm going to enable macros. Click on the Show Hide Column tab again. I'm going to hide everything. Let's start again with the element ID, and I'm going to explain this in just a second. I'm doing that for a reason. We're going to add mark as our ID. There might be a couple other parameters we know that are part of the door schedule. So for example, if we had door material, door finish, we might have some things related to glass, glass thickness, glass type, maybe fire rating. It looks like there's a couple parameters in here related to fire rating. Without knowing which one, I'm just going to add both of them. And I think we're good. Let's hit the apply button and see what that looks like. Okay. And here's our mark values. If we wanted to organize things differently, there's no harm in taking an entire column, cutting it, and inserting it in a different location. But in this case, what I really want to do is I want to find the doors who require a card reader. So what I can do is I can take that spreadsheet that we just received, or is it, that's my lighting fixtures. I'm actually going to close this out. Here's our card reader spreadsheet. I can right-click on the tab and I can make a copy of it. And I'm going to copy it right into my door worksheet. I'm going to create a copy, maybe put it on the end. And there it goes. In the Doors tab again, I can use a formula in one of the columns on the very end. So if I say equals, Microsoft Excel has a match command or a match formula in which I feed it a value. This is the mark value in the project that I exported. The array of doors that require card readers. Okay. And then there's a match type. This is an integer value that I need to enter a 0 to specify that I want to get an exact match. Okay. And if it doesn't find a match, it's going to give me an NA. It gives me an error message. If I'm going to drag this cell down, then I need to make sure I put some dollar signs around my range. You guys who've used Excel quite a bit know that like the dollar sign is going to hold those values constant. Otherwise, Excel might adjust the values. And you can see we've got a lot of NAs in here. These are doors that aren't additionally required to have a card reader, but some of them do find them. And what Excel is reporting to me is the specific row in which the door matches the number. So let me go through and I'm going to drag this down for all of them. Okay. And the thing is, if we get an update to the model, and in this example, we've got a whole bunch of doors that we need to update with card readers. There's two things that I actually need to do, right? So on the one hand, there's probably a schedule field like comments that I need to add the word card reader to. But then on the other hand, I have to put revision clouds on all of the floor plans for the doors. So that requires me to actually find them inside the model. So if I want to find these guys in the model, there's an easier way we can do that with Excel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the rows. I am going to sort them by column DT. Choose OK. Now, I told you I was going to explain why I chose the element IDs. Because if we can copy this into Revit's find element by ID command, it'll highlight all of them for us. But we just have to put them in a row first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy them, and then I'm going to paste them transposed. So they're listed in a row. Then I'm going to copy the new row, go back to Revit, and under the Manage tab of the ribbon bar, this is an out-of-the-box command for Revit. I can choose Select by ID. I'm going to ignore any save reminders. I haven't saved the project in a while. But now I'm going to paste that list of element IDs into the field. Click on the OK button. And now I'm going to type, remember, the out-of-the-box command to isolate selected elements temporarily is HI, Hotel India. And those are the 24 doors that I was emailed that are required to be updated. Okay. So now I could use that find. I can go through my floors one by one, use that same select elements by ID, and allow Revit to highlight the objects, the families, which need a revision cloud around them. Alternately, maybe I need a formula in here to update a field for my schedule. And maybe I ought to just double check this real quick. If I've got a door schedule in the project, there's a field where I might need to add a note or a comment, and it may simply be called comments, that I would add a card reader if it doesn't exist already. So I'm going to go back to my Show Hide columns. I'm going to add comments as a visible field. Apply. And now you can see I've actually done this previously. And I'll show you exactly what I did. I took this row, and I'm going to paste it in, and I'm going to update this. We are looking for, we're matching our mark. Okay. Whoops. There's our mark. We need our range. You can see when I copied and pasted the formula, I kind of got us into trouble here. So we know these are the guys that need to be updated. But we could get fancy with our formulas too. we know when a card reader is required, we get a number, and when it's not, we don't get a number. So Excel gives me a formula to say, is number? And of course, that's a conditional statement. So I'm going to have to wrap that in an if loop. So if that value is a number, then what I can say, the resulting value is going to be row L, ampersand, open quote, comma, card reader. Otherwise, if it's not a number, if it comes up as an NA, we're just going to use column L2, right? And I got to make sure I get the number of parentheses correct. And of course, I'm going to get it wrong. We'll try one more. Uh-oh. So let's see. We should only have one black. So if match 2 is a number, and here we are, I put a comma in there. I never did a closed quote. Okay. And you can kind of see when a number value is found, we add another card reader to the end of this. And obviously, I've gone through this example before. So we can keep appending words here as a function of whether or not that element was found inside of a list. Okay. So we can use Excel's match command to match information from an external source previously unrelated to the BIM model, and then marry it to a data source inside the BIM model. I can take the values now and copy them. I'm going to paste them back into the field as values. And of course, I would have to do some more formula wizardry to make this look nice. But for now, I'm going to delete out the formulas, save the file, and back inside of Revit, I'm going to update my door schedule. No errors were reported. There are no technical errors, but we're going to see some stuff in here. Probably looks a little bit funny. We've got some card readers in here. But in principle, the theory that we can add text as a function of whether something was found in a list or not, I think is pretty powerful. So other examples would be, I mentioned earlier, if you're an owner or operator who needs to add barcodes or commissioning information to existing parameters to your BIM model before you integrate it in with your CMS, this is one way to do it. Similarly, we might be able to go into an engineering project, and an MEP designer might be exporting information to give to their manager who may not be fluent in Revit, who's updating information like min and max CFMs and providing that back to them in Excel. Or we could be getting balancing schedules from a commissioning agent, and we need to get the information back into the floor plan for the owner who wants this as an as-built condition. Okay, so imagine we had a spreadsheet that looked something like this. Once again, not related to the project. We've got VAV box numbers in here and box types. What we'd like to do is grab all of the mechanical equipment. So just like we did in the architectural model, I created a view filter that allows me to select all of the mechanical equipment in the active view. Okay. I can extract it. And this time, yeah, I've done this before. We're going to overwrite the main equipment file. All right. And now we can come in and we're going to open up the equipment file, main equipment. And once again, we've got multiple tabs in here. I'm going to get to importing that information in just a second, but there was one thing that I wanted to show you as well. Under the export catalog, the BIMrx is going to list all of the parameters that are loaded in each of the families. So in MEP design, it's very common that we might download equipment from manufacturers' websites. And if the vendor or the manufacturer created a custom shared parameter uniquely from me that doesn't match with the same parameter in my schedule, very often I'm going to get redundant parameters of the same name. And the reason for that is because Revit identifies those objects underneath the hood using a 20-digit unique hexadecimal code referred to as a GUID, or a global user identifier. So we actually need the GUID to identify if we've got redundant parameters or not. We could use the Export Catalog tab to choose a parameter that we think might be problematic. And maybe I'm just going to search for any parameter that contains the word airflow. Okay. And here we can kind of see an issue. Actually, no, we don't. You can see our min airflow has redundant numbers. So maybe the issue here then, or what we can use Revit for, is if we wanted to identify whether we had an outlier parameter in here, is we could actually provide a conditional format, highlight cells for duplicate values. Okay, so duplicate values are going to highlight in red, and if one of these parameters were suspect, if I needed to replace it with one of my company's shared parameters, it wouldn't be duplicated in here. It would only exist inside of one family. So in this case, I'm pretty well satisfied as a BIM manager that we're actually using the correct shared parameters. Alternately, we might have some concern that non-shared parameters are being used, in which case a GUID is not exported. So these are the ones that aren't necessarily wrong, but I might be a little bit concerned about. Okay. So you'll notice at the bottom of the screen now, unlike the lighting fixture and door schedule, we got multiple tabs. So the default for BIMrx is to export one tab per family. And as a result, the information gets a little bit harder to edit. So I'm thinking we might re-export this because I prefer all of that to be combined onto a single tab. My selection set still is intact. So I'm going to extract one tab per category. And that's the difference between those two radio buttons. I'll click export, and we're going to overwrite that equipment file again. And I think we're going to find this is easier to edit once we open it up. Okay. There's my file. Let's go to mechanical equipment now. And once again, I'm going to enable macros. BIMrx does provide a couple more tools. We've got a macro for zooming sheets, and that's going to zoom out just a little bit. We can auto fit columns. And yeah, that's nice too. I think the nicest one, though, is that show hide. I'm going to come back in here, and you'll notice that sometimes it seems like it stops a little bit short. There may be a problem parameter in my model that's coming up blank. So I'm just going to delete that. There's no harm in deleting a parameter in here, as long as we're not going to re-import its value. You just want to avoid deleting some of the, there's some critical fields in here like element ID. And if you were to scroll all the way to the right-hand side, there would be a GUID that we don't want to delete because the software is actually using that. But for any given parameter, if it doesn't exist on import, it simply won't get imported. So now I'm going to come up, and now we can see all of our parameters, all of our columns. Let's hide everything, and I think maybe I would like the family and the type name. The element ID is going to help me select things later on. There's a couple parameters in here. This project in particular has a CD tag, and there might other be a parameter in here that I saw earlier was called tag. So now I'm a little bit confused. If I'm managing this project, if I'm responsible for the turnover to the owner, I'm kind of wondering, what is my design team doing? Why do they have two different parameters and which one's correct? Let's add both of them. And then we also have some parameters in here related to airflow. So let's go find maximum airflow, minimum airflow, and let's apply that and see what it looks like. So here's our CD tag. Here's our tag. Hopefully they all match. And now this part's interesting. We've got a library of families in which some of the parameters are set to instance values and other ones are set to type. So this would be an example of how we might use this model, or we might use BIMrx as a QA/QC tool. Like, we would want all of our CD tags to be correct unique identifiers. But these are not the unique IDs. Let me go back to Revit real quick. And I want to see what the actual parameter is that's unique per VAV box. And here we are. It's called designation. In Excel, I'm going to go to Show Hide Columns, add the designation. Okay. And there we are. So now we've got another spreadsheet that lists all of the airflows that we were given from a third-party source. Once again, I'm going to make a copy of that into the BIMrx export spreadsheet. I'll put it on the end. And under the Mechanical Equipment tab, I'm going to now, instead of using a match column, I'm going to do a Vlookup. And I think we're actually going to do this with the maximum airflow, right? It's not going to be an empty column this time. So maximum airflow is going to be Vlookup, open parentheses. We're using the value that was exported from Revit. The range is going to be the schedule we have here, comma, the index. I want to get the maximum out of the third column, so I'm going to enter a 3. And then now, do we want to allow an approximate match? The answer is false. I can hit the Enter key, and our Vlookup did find a maximum airflow. And now you can see as I drag that formula down, the values are updating. Okay. Now I can drag this over. I do have to be careful now as I drag over. We're looking at BN2 as our column, BN2. We're looking at the same table. That part's okay. And now instead of column 3, we're looking at column 4. Right? Column 3, column 4. And I'm going to drag this all the way down. Oh, yeah. And now we start getting to, you can see there are some families in the export that don't have those minimum maximum airflows. But by including the family type, I can tell that these are some exhaust dampers. So maybe that makes sense. We're just updating our VAV boxes and our Phoenix cells. Okay. Doing a quick spot check. Anytime I automate information like this, it can be kind of dangerous to drag and drop in Excel. But I just want to make sure everything makes sense. Do I have the maximum in the right column and the minimum in the right column? That's a mistake I could make. I'm going to copy everything I've got highlighted, right-click and paste the values, just so there's no confusion on import. I'll save the file, and I'm going to go back into Revit real quick. On the Microdesk tab of the ribbon bar, I'll click the Update button and select the main equipment file that I just created. Okay, and you noticed, if you looked carefully, that many of the CFM values updated. No errors were reported, but I can do a Control-Z to undo that, and a Control-Y to redo it, and we can verify that change right before our eyes. Okay, so keep in mind that was an example where we received information from a third-party source, previously unrelated to the model, except that it shared a unique identifier for all of the major equipment. Okay. Furthermore, as a QA/QC effort, we could have used that lookup formula to identify cases where we got that NA, meaning that the lookup command didn't actually find the VAV box number in the list that we received from the commissioning agent or from the project engineer. Okay. Let's try something else real quick, and this will just be another simple example. I mentioned there's a lot of cases where we might have senior leadership who is not fluent in the Revit software, but nevertheless needs information to perform their own calculations or their own assessment of the project status. So we can use BIMrx to export information. And in the example I gave earlier, is we might want to calculate a volume inside of a pipe system. And I know Revit does that natively if everything is connected properly. But we know in practice that that's not always the case. You know, right here in this example, I see a broken connection at my split case pumps. So in this case, I've got an energy recovery system, and I'd like to size the expansion tank. So I can use the selection tool. And one thing about the selection tool I didn't show you earlier, we can actually combine selection sets. So it's very much like Navisworks in that regard. In this particular project, we created view filters based on pipe and duct systems. So in this case, if we're a glycol system, we've got a GR and a GS. And in this case, it looks like the project has redundantly named filters. I don't know which ones are right. So I can shift or control select all of them. No entities in the selection rule. I'm glad this happened. So the selection set's going to apply to the active view. So it's specifically like the selection filter in Revit, where you draw a selection window and it filters out what's in the selection. In this case, you'll notice that my ductwork floor plan was the active view and not my 3D isometric, where all of the glycol pipe was. So now I'm going to come back and hit select. We're going to go down to our pipes, shift select, and now I've got my entire systems. I'm going to go to the Microdesk tab and extract. One tab per category, and then export. So in this case, we're going to call this GSGR, glycol supply and return. Okay. I'm going to go into my file with my folder with all my XML files. Enable editing. And now in this case, maybe we want to get a pipe volume. So we know that Revit out of the box includes an inner diameter for pipe. So once again, I can use the hide show columns macro. Hide everything. Include the inner diameter, the length, everything we need to calculate volume. And maybe in reality, that's all we really need. Let's hit the apply button. You can see this exported in units of our inner diameter, units of inches, our length, it looks like in units of feet. So that makes sense if you understand Revit's drawing units, how pipe size is in inches, length is in feet. We'll have to pay attention to unit conversion if we're going to do the math. So let's say the length. Let's calculate this then. I think it'll be easier in square inches, and then we can convert it later. So let's do length times 12 times the inside diameter, caret, squared, divided by 4. So now we're 16.88 cubic inches. I'm going to drag that down. We could do a sum. So there we are in cubic inches. And, you know, if we wanted that in cubic feet, then we could divide that by 12 squared, I guess, 144. And alternately, we could do a gallons conversion if we wanted to. But now in this case, with very little effort, with very little, you know, certainly we could get this information in Revit as well. We could have created a view schedule. If I went to the View tab of the ribbon bar and created a schedule, okay, we could only choose one category at a time. So where the BIMrx gave us multi-tabbed, we could come in here and sum up all of the pipe fittings as well. or find all of the valves. We get counts of all of the valves in there. If we wanted to get those quantity takeoffs, we'd have to do it category by category if they had unique parameters. In this case, I would have to come in and choose pipes, add the length, add the inside diameter. We could put a formula column in here if we wanted to, add a calculated parameter. We could call this volume. We got to make sure that the units are correct. So we have to make sure that this is volume. And the formula is going to be length. Now I don't have to do the unit conversion. Revit's going to handle that for me. Times inside diameter squared divided by 4. Okay. Then under formatting, I can take the volume, calculate totals, and include a grand total. Okay, and then we get the, in units of cubic feet, we get them at the very bottom here. So it takes a few additional clicks. If we have the selection filter already set up, oh, and I guess we've got an issue too because we haven't filtered this as a function of system. So I would have to come in and say, we're going to filter by, well, I'd have to add the field for system. So if I came in here and I said the system, not abbreviation, then we said if the system abbreviation maybe begins with G. Okay, then we get the glycol return and glycol supply. So with some of these options, there is an out-of-the-box way to do it. It takes a little bit more in-depth Revit knowledge. And if somebody just wanted that raw data dump and they're fluent in Excel, with a couple button clicks, we can export that information very quickly. And then furthermore, if we're editing in Excel, we have access to some tools and some search features that Excel simply doesn't have. So we can make those edits in Excel, round trip the information, and validate the quality of the information. Well, all right, we're about 11:45, so I'm just going to check the questions now. I think I've shown you everything that I want to show. Oh, so here's a great question. So we got this from Bassam out in California. Anything planned to include rooms and spaces? So the answer is yes. Right now, our BIMrx this is our V1 release that we've updated. And the Microdesk strategy over the course of the years to strengthen the tool based on popular requests that we've received. So the current application does not export information related to rooms or spaces. I'm glad you asked that, Bassam, because I don't want to make any promises for what the tool can't do. This is a priority on the release cycle, which is going to happen in the middle of this year. Other things so while we're talking about it, it's worth mentioning, when I described parameters in the Excel file that are highlighted in blue as type parameters, BIMrx currently does not import type parameters. That is also on our list of updates to include. And it wasn't excluded from the initial release because it was programmatically difficult to do. And in fact, the code seems to be pretty simple. The challenge is just a strategy for how the end user would expect type parameters to be updated. So you could imagine that if I had a type parameter of 2 different families of the same type, then the values would naturally have to be the same. So we have to think about, well, if somebody entered 2 different values for the same type parameter in the same family, how would they expect that to update? And finalizing that decision is the only thing that is in front of us before we apply that to the update. Along those lines, right now the tool only applies to elements who we can select with a family instance type. So just like rooms and spaces are on the horizon, so are views and sheets, which are currently not part of it. Thanks, Bassam. And now, oh, so is it possible to delete the mark value if it's not needed? So Revit requires a mark value for most families of an instance type. So in other family, so the mark value seems to be a function of the element category. In a door, architects use the mark value to indicate the room number, right? And we're in here somewhere. So I'm going nuts. It's right there. There are other parameters where the mark value, or there are other family categories that don't use the mark value. Let me come back in here for a second. Reset temporary hide and slate. One example I can think of off the top of my head is ceilings. So ceilings all have a blank mark value. Family types like light fixtures, mechanical equipment, air terminals always have an auto-incremented mark value. And I would caution you against deleting the mark. Yeah, and in fact, you may not even be able to. Or if you did, boy, that might be a very good question. I may not actually have an answer to that. I never thought to just do that. It concerns me though, because the mark value is something that Revit tracks. It signals warnings against. If two elements were missing a mark value, that would concern me. Boy, that's a great question, Will, and it might be a little bit outside of the scope of the call today. But maybe we'll do some digging on the forums and find out if there's any repercussions to deleting the mark value. Because it's always been so important to Revit, we've used it the way Revit wants. We have a question, will this be available as a recording? Yes, Microdesk is recording the webinar, and I'm certain our marketing team will provide information on how we can download this. It's very likely if we look at the recording and it went smoothly, this might even get posted on the website. Revit 2019 and 2020 ready. 2019, absolutely. So I was just using a model that I already had set up in 2019. 2020 is going to be ready very shortly. I don't have a date on that. I don't know if I should tell you this or not. There's with the Revit API, Autodesk is very good at managing code that they deprecate or make obsolete. And in fact, they won't change anything in the API without giving the software developers 1 year advance notification. And what that means is, if our development team has managed all of the warnings correctly in the code, then you should be able to take the 19 version of Revit and basically copy paste the DLL and use it as a 2020 version, assuming you still have Revit 19 installed. So that's a long story to explain that if we did our job at Microdesk, that 19 tool is more or less already 2020 enabled. We simply just have to provide an installer for it. All right, very good. Well, I don't see any more questions. So this might be a good place to wrap up. I'll give you guys another 10 minutes to enjoy the remainder of your lunch. I want to thank you all for attending. Again, my name is Will Mainor. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Microdesk. our support line. I'm certain you've already got a contact information for Microdesk if you've attended this call. But you can always reach out to us for support if you've got additional questions, or if you would like a demo of the tools or notification as soon as we update them, then please do not hesitate to contact us. All right. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of your day.